Hello again, YouTube. It is Bobby, aka Try Ketchum, here for another Madness cast. And last week we kind of got into some CSS and Sass and HTML stuff. I wasn't too thrilled with the result of like where we were moving, just because of the fact that I don't know, we really want to cover a lot more of the stencil stuff. We really want to get into the internals there. And I just ended up going down a whole route on just doing a bunch of styles and stuff like that. So that being said, we kind of wanted to adjust the format a little bit, and also make it so that we're a little bit more forefront with kind of where we're going as we're making these. So as you might have been able to tell throughout this is also kind of a new process for us and a new outlet for some of the creative stuff that we do here. So that being, oh, let me mute myself here. Oops. So that being said, as you can see, we're kind of still playing around with the format, seeing exactly how we want to do this. But what became clear last week was that we wanted to have a little bit more of a game plan moving forward. So from here on out, we're going to start releasing the links to the actual live cast. We're going to do those a couple days in advance to give some time to actually program that into the calendar. And then also we're going to have kind of like a theme or just a basic, basic general theme that we're going to try to stick to on these videos. And that way each week you know what you're going to be tuning into rather than just coming in and saying like, okay, where are they going to be out this week? So hopefully this will kind of make this a little easier to come in when you kind of want to and jump out when you don't need to, so that it's a little bit better for some of the more seasoned people. And then also we still have like the raw format where we don't really have a script, we don't really have all the answers worked out. Part of the thrill of this, I think, for me myself, is to kind of be a little bit more honest and upfront with how development really works. Too often you have the imposter syndrome in development where you believe that like everyone else gets it but you don't, and so I wanted this to be kind of like a really honest format, and just show all of the trials and tribulations that go along with actually developing an application. So I guess I'll just kind of open with that, and that's why this week we're going to be talking about testing. It's something that we finished off with last week. It was like right at the end of the video. I wanted to get into some testing, get into some higher level stuff. And then I kind of realized that I myself haven't written a ton of testing when it comes to actually like interfaces and stuff like that. I've done back-end code. I did a little bit when I wrote React a couple years ago, but I've never really sat down and like really dug in and wrapped my head fully around testing, especially like a piece of user interface. So this is a really neat experience for me to get to learn this process a little bit better and using Jest. And so if you haven't heard of Jest, let me jump over to the monitor here. Boom. So if you haven't heard of Jest, Jest is a testing utility that was created by the lovely people at Facebook as they were making React. They had to kind of have a test suite that they could use alongside of it in order to kind of allow them to sleep at night. A lot of times when you write code, if you're kind of newer to the development field, a lot of times when you write code, you end up handing it off to the client. You think everything's good, and then they find something wrong with it, or the stuff that you had on your machine doesn't work the same as it does when it got up to the server. And so over the years, people have gotten wise to this, and so developers have started writing tests. And a test just basically runs your code, it inputs some kind of data, and then it tests the output of the data. And so this is what the lovely people at Ionic have. This is like what they've built as the testing utility for stencil components. And they've done a really elegant way of kind of integrating testing and like, because when you look at React, you're generally using another library called, oh God, what was it called? It's X something. Anyway, enzyme, that's what it is. So they use something called enzyme, and that kind of like renders the element. But in Stencil, they don't really work in the same way, and so they have their own render and flush functions that go about actually. Let me pop open the project here. They have their own render and flush functions that do kind of the same thing. So if you've never written a test, it's very easy to do. And actually, if you use our MadnessEnjin command line tool, it will automatically generate tests for you with each component. And so a test might look something like this guy here. So as you can see at the top, we import flush and render from Stencil Core testing. Then we import our actual component, and then we describe our component, and then we say what it should do, and then these expect statements, and I will get into like the actual nitty-gritty of this, but just follow me along here. Then we have another describe of rendering, then we set an element, and then we render that element before each one of these statements, and then we actually go about testing it should work without parameters, and then we have an async function. So this is a lot to take in all at once, but basically it kind of comes back to like plain English. And so when you're writing tests, you kind of like read them, or it's almost like you're stepping through the logic of your component or your piece of code without actually having to write any code. So writing tests is a really good way of kind of putting the work in up front in order to kind of think out where you're really going. So what am I going to be taking in as parameters? What am I going to be expecting to show on the screen? And that's why a lot of people have adopted TDD or test-driven development. We don't really adopt test-driven development. We more use it under like giant pieces of very important functionality we write tests for, just so that we can make sure something doesn't break when we push it to a production server. But generally, we haven't been as test-driven as we would like to be. And so hopefully this will also be kind of our foray into making this a more regular part of our routine. Because it is heavily valuable when you kind of start out and do all the work up front. And that way, when you lay code down, you're doing it with purpose. And you're not just kind of, putting out fires as you're going through your project. And also, we've noticed that coming back into something that's already made and trying to document and trying to write tests for it is really, really difficult, because you've already got so much logic programmed there. And if you don't write these tests kind of right alongside of them, it can be really difficult to come back later and pay that extra technical debt to set them up properly. So I hope we're coming in all right on the stream. I noticed the quality wasn't great when I was checking it in the studio. So I was hoping that once I went live, it would bump up. So let me know if the quality is absolute garbage, and I'll see if I can do something about that. Because definitely don't want everyone watching a blurry text screen while listening to me blab on. I will even ask. So, okay, so I think I ran into a bug earlier today. So I'm gonna run npm start here, and I'm gonna start up my project. And then once it opens the browser, I will push it over here. Okay, cool. So last week, again, did a lot of styling stuff. And we got this whole like page set up with our home page. We got the header at the top, the content area with our Ion grid, and then we made some little fun bubbles with Ion icons in them. So, and then at the bottom we have the footer. And what I have open here is the footer spec. I'm going to also open the footer, the regular footer, and I'm going to put this guy down here. So I'm going to open these guys side by side so we can see them in tandem. And then up here, let's go into, cool, I've got my build process running here. Now I'm going to go into another terminal window, and I'm going to run npm run tests. Or no, tests.watch. So run, again, run, if you didn't watch our other Madness cast, when you do npm run, you're just running commands that are under this package.json file. You're just running these little sections here under scripts. So when I do run test.watch, it's just running this test.watch functionality from inside the package.json, and that's just going to run this command in the terminal. So if you've never used any kind of like front-end build tools or something like that, the package.json has kind of become the new de facto standard for kind of wiring up all of your like developer tasks and stuff like that. We've kind of moved to it over the last like year or so. We used to have all of our stuff wired up through Gulp, but not having to have all those external dependencies and having one file that you can come back to is super helpful. So anyway, we run the npm run test watch, and we can also just do test if we wanted to just run the tests without it watching. But in this case, we're going to run a test watch, and that way it's actually going to watch as we write these tests to make sure that everything passes. So the first time you run a test, it will look something like this. It will have probably a gnarly error on it, and it will have all the text that you put in here. So you can see, I will save this guy. And I probably have to make a save on it, or change. There we go. Okay, so we can see here is, I will expand this a little bit to make it bigger. So what we see here is we've got a failed test here for source components madnessfooter, madnessfooter.spec.ts. And under the should work without parameters, it is getting a invalid testing root node. I was getting this earlier, and I've actually been in talks with the guys at Ionic on trying to figure out what exactly is going on here, because this should, in theory, work. Because generally, what happens is when I define this before each, and I set this element, and I do this render, you're passing in the actual component file, so the class, and then you're passing in the HTML for the actual element to render, and then that generates an HTML element. And so from there, that element is actually going to be the same thing that you'd find in like the DOM. So if you were to like inspect an element over here, and say, for instance, this is the footer. So if I inspect the footer, and then a little secret tip on DevTools, if you do $0, you can get the current item that you have hovered over in the elements panel. You can get that to log out. So what I'm going to do is do console.dir, and that's going to log out the HTML element. So this is exactly what element is going to equal inside of this test file. And if you want to follow along, we have this repo up on our GitHub. It's github.com/madnesslabs /madnesslabs PWA. And I will make sure that I actually put a link in the description for that guy, so that you can actually jump over and follow along with this if you wish. But this is what element is going to equal inside of our tests. It's going to be the actual HTML element. So we can actually test anything on this element. So in this case, in it should work without parameters, we do a flush, which just basically re-renders the element, and then we say expect, and then element.textContent, which in this case, text content should be, if we scroll down, text content should be empty because I have nothing being passed to the footer. And then I expect it to equal, and then an empty string. So as you can see, it equals an empty string here, and it equals an empty string in this test. So in theory, that should actually be passing. It doesn't pass because of the fact that there's some kind of a bug where it's not handing back the element. And so I'm working with them to try to figure out exactly why that's happening. I don't know if I'm an idiot and I've done something wrong. And if you see something, okay, okay, at least it's readable. Thanks, Valerio. Glad to see you're tuning in again. Hopefully we can keep this as interesting as possible for you. So hopefully this video is at least usable. If not, I'm sure that once it actually uploads to YouTube, it'll be its usual 720p goodness. And if not, I guess I'll just re-upload this guy later. But yeah, I definitely want this to be something that you can read, which would suck if you couldn't. Okay, so basically what we have now is we have a test that is going to expect something to equal something else. And this is the basis of all tests. So really you have a couple like keywords here, a couple methods that you can use inside of Jest. You have describe, which describes like it kind of groups an area of tests. Then you have the expect, which basically tells it that you're about to assert something, which just means that like, hey, I'm about to like make a statement that needs to be true for the test to pass. So in this case, it should build, which actually does pass. So if you see here, it says, no, actually no, both of the tests failed. Womp womp. So as you can see here, we actually have the expect madness footer to be truthy. So all this does is it loads up the class for the component and then tells it like, is it defined? Is it truthy? Is it some kind of value? And if it's not, then it'll fail out. And so when I change, for instance, like I forget something, it's going to run the tests again because we're watching, and it's going to see that that is not passing. So you can see here now one failed, one passed. And that's because it actually couldn't define it as truthy because it obviously didn't compile out. But when I fix it, da 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 da. Awesome. Now you'll see that I should have one more. Come on, you can do it. I should have another actual passing test. Try to save it one more time. Okay. So again, there's a bug here. So we can't really get into testing our actual stencil components, which makes me a sad, sad panda. But what I decided to actually do is that we're not actually limited to testing just our components. So even though we can write tests to actually test our JavaScript stuff, as far as like the components go, I'm gonna actually go and write some tests for a service. So in this case, we need a REST service. We need something that's going to allow us to query our API and then come back with a response. So this is going to be used on our homepage here to go and get like the newest blog posts so that we can get this background image as well as like the blog information that we need. So in order to do that, I'm going to actually write a service, and I'm going to write an API service. I've already written one earlier, so I might be referencing that because I will probably forget it. But we're going to make a new folder under services. So I've created the services directory. This is where I'm going to store different bits of functionality that aren't tied to any page. So for instance, you know, when you're first writing a project, you're really tempted to just write everything in your controllers. So underneath all of these components, it's really tempting to write all of your functionality directly in the component. But what you're going to start finding is that there's things that you might need elsewhere inside of your project. So you might need you know, phone number parser. You might need something like that that sits outside of the actual components, and then you just kind of import them and use it where it's necessary. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing here. We're going to make an API service that is going to basically, its whole purpose will be to query the back end of our website and come back with data. And then what's also great about this is that it's going to kind of be a wrapper. Hello. Yes, Emily is also here. I think she's now probably running the chat. So like this is going to allow us to also kind of wrap around some kind of REST library. And that way, if we decide to like change the backend at any point in time, if we try to change something, we've got one place that we can go and change that rather than having to go through 18 controllers to change out our REST methods or something like that. So this is generally the kind of the way that we try to tackle things. And that way we make sure that if we decide to move to something, we're not going to have to spend a whole bunch of hours refactoring a bunch of code and going through 800 different files to change things. And what's great is that, again, with the Stencil web component kind of direction, it allows you to really easily encapsulate things into little tiny pieces. And then we can kind of do that same thing with our services and that same thing with our pages. and really get everything very manageable. And hopefully even, when something new comes out or we want to put this into a framework, we can very simply drag and reuse all of these pieces, which is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder here called API. This is going to hold our API service. This is kind of a new paradigm that I've started underneath these projects. Usually I have just a list of services like api.ts underneath services, but just like the components up here, I think it makes a lot of sense to keep a folder full of all of your spec, your testing file, your mocks, all of that stuff underneath the component. And that way you're not going all over your project to try to find these things. I think it's really helpful, especially once you jump into a file and the code editor kind of pops it open on the left panel. That way all your stuff is kind of grouped together. So underneath this folder, I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it api.ts. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just export a, let me make sure I get my syntax right. Yeah. We're going to export a class, and we're going to call it API. Okay, so now we've got a class called API. Now we probably want a test so that we can actually test to make sure that API exists and it's working. So what we're going to do is the same thing that we do over in our stencil components. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call it api.spec.ts. And what this is going to do is this is going to basically go about testing to make sure our API service actually works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and the very first thing you're going to have to do is import. So we're going to import our service. We're going to import API from /API. So if you're not familiar with the import syntax, maybe you're used to like require or something like that. If you're not used to import, it works very simply. You're just importing whatever something else is exporting. So in this case, API, we are exporting a class called API. So then in my file where I'm using that service, I need to import, and then in these brackets, I then put API, the name of the class, and then I actually put the name of the file, like where the file is located. And notice I don't have to put the .ts or .js or anything like that. The bundler automatically figures that stuff out for you. So it makes it super simple. And in this case, the /, so you might have noticed that in other files we import, we import from like StencilCore or something like that. Note that there's no / or / or anything like that. That tells it that this is going to come from the node modules folder, whereas this import function here, since it has a / in front of it, it knows that it's going to search relative to this specific file. So in this case, I'm going in the same directory. / is like the same directory, the directory that this exists inside of. And then I'm going into the api.ts file, and that's going to import my API. Okay, so now just like with our where'd my other spec go? Just like with our spec that we wrote here for the footer, we need to actually go about describing what we're trying to test. So I'm going to describe what we're testing here by typing describe and then putting in the string argument of what we're describing. So in this case, I'm describing the API service. And then the second argument is a function, and I'm using fat arrow because fat arrow. And basically this is what's going to, like, again, group up a set of tests. So in this case, we are testing API service. So we need to describe that so that we can see it on the console down here. And I think that's probably all we need to even just get it started. So once we save, let me restart my tests. All right, so we now see testing root node. Yeah, we know that doesn't work. Okay, we can see that here the API test suite failed to run. Your test suite must contain at least one test. So it's giving us an error that says that we need to at least define something to test before it can actually help us out here. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and initiate our API. So let's say new API, or sorry, let API service equal new API. So now I've initiated or started the actual API service. So now I want to actually just test to make sure that that came back as truthy, the exact same way that we did over here inside of our stencil test. So I'm going to go ahead and say it, and it is just a way of saying like it's again kind of declaring a truthy type value. So either it is true and it will pass, or it is false and it will fail. So I'm going to say it should load, and then inside of here, sorry, it's not an it statement. I'm so dumb. Inside of here, we're going to, as a second parameter, we're going to also pass a function. And inside of here, we want to go about just basically testing, say expect API service to be truthy. And so what this is going to do is it's just going to like check to see if this is true. So again, we're just initiating an empty class, but it should at least come back truthy. So if this went well, we should be able to see here. I need to like stop these other tests from running. API. There it is. Should work without parameters. Okay, I'm going to kill these other tests really quick, just so that they are not getting in our way. And the same thing here with my REST service. Okay. Okay, so hopefully they're still running. Man, these tests just do not like me today. Okay. Let's just delete them all together. Why not? Oops, no, not that guy. See, I told you these were going to be honest. Okay. Pardon my derpiness. Okay.
You can do it!
You can do it! You can do it! Okay. Woo! Okay, I'm going to delete my other tests that I have going on here because they're getting confusing to look at. Okay, there we go. That looks much better. So now we can actually see we're going to do this one at a time now. Okay. Okay, so you can see here we have an empty class. We have a very basic test. We're importing the API controller. We are describing the API service, as you can see here. So it's API service, and then should load. So we have the should load, and then we expect the API service to be truthy, which it is, so it passed. So if this wasn't truthy, like I just, I don't know, just did something like that, you can see that it wasn't able to load. We didn't initiate the class. It wasn't truthy, and so it failed. But once we get it working, it passes. So maybe we have a function on our API that does a GET request. And let's just say for now that this GET request returns some kind of a string. So let's just do something simple like return we. Now we need to write a test to see if that GET request works. So now we can do another assertion. So we say it, and we say should GET request and then we put another function there, and then we say expect API service dot get to equal, and then we put we. And now you'll see that we have two tests. So we have should load, and should get request. Both of them have green check marks because they've passed, and we can see down here it tells us and they indeed did pass. And then if we were to change this to say something else like woo, then you're going to note that that fails. So we see here the red X shows us that the get request has failed, and it should get request expected to get woo, but instead received we. So this is the basic mentality of testing. It's very, very simple at its core. I think it's really intimidating at first. When you first get into it and you first start looking into it, it's very difficult, and it has a little bit of a learning curve, especially when you start getting into more complex things. But 100% game changer when it comes to being able to sleep at night and knowing that, like, when your client asks you, well, I thought this or I thought that, you have tests and you have these things to back up why you did something or how something works or if something works. And it also, as a developer, can kind of force you to think ahead. So in this case, like as you saw before, I wrote get and I wrote some code and then I wrote a test. In test-driven development, generally you actually start in the actual test and then write the actual code around the test. So you might do something like it should post request. And hello to anyone who's watching at home. Hopefully the quality is good enough for you to be able to read this. If not, please tune back in after the live cast. It'll be up on YouTube, hopefully in 720p at least. And if not, I will re-upload it myself. But yeah, hopefully you guys can see this and follow along. Make sure to say hi to Emily. She's running the chat.
Hi, good to see everybody. Thanks for listening in.
She's wonderful. She's just wonderful. So, and again, I'll use this as a chance here to plug. Please come subscribe to us on YouTube. We make tons of good learning resources, and we're going to have a lot more coming. This is going to be a regular thing. As I said at the beginning of the video, we're going to be kind of making a little bit more structure to these things, coming up with a general theme for each week, and then broadcasting it much earlier, probably like a Wednesday, a Thursday, something like that, or maybe even over the weekend. We'll actually give out the link and kind of what we're covering next week. That way we also kind of set the expectation about what you can what you can expect us to cover each week. So also feel free to follow us on Twitter at MadnessLabs. We post fairly way too much because I'm addicted to Twitter. And also you can support us on Patreon. So we're going to have a bunch of cool exclusive stuff coming. We might do like a Q&A, private Q&A sessions, stuff like that for our Patreons here coming up. We can guarantee that if you donate to our Patreon, you will get some kind of special goodie. I might even run up to you and give you a high five. I mean, maybe. We won't count our chickens before they hatch, but you know, maybe.
High fives for the win.
All right, you can have one. Okay, so back to our tests here. So if we're doing test-driven development, we probably want to write the test up front. So instead, we're going to say, okay, if I'm doing an API controller, I probably need to be able to do a post request as well. So I'm going to say expect, I'm going to expect whatever query that I'm going to do to my API to give me back post, and it's always going to equal, expect, too many parens there, Bobby. Expect to equal dogs rock. Okay, so API service.post, and you'll see that it's already actually giving us an error here because it knows that that doesn't exist. That's not a method, but it's okay. We're going to save it anyway and watch it error out. So it says API. It would also help if I spelled things right. Okay. So yeah, you can see here, it already knows because TypeScript is awesome and VS Code is awesome. It already knows that post is not a method. It was able to read from this import and figure out, hey, that's not a method, dumbass. But sorry, YouTube, don't demonetize. Oh wait, we're not monetized. Anyway, I cracked myself out. Okay, so anyway, we can see here that we have post is not defined, but I'm gonna save it anyway, and we'll see that it fails out. So it should post fails out. Post is not a function. It gives us the error back that we would receive. So now that it's failing, we can go into our actual code and we can say, okay, I'm going to do a post and it's going to return dogs rock. And when I save, what did I say? Wait, did I do it right? Yes, I did. All right, it's still giving us a fail. Oh, that's because our first test failed. The other one's working fine. There we go. So you can see there, that's kind of how test-driven development works. You kind of fail and realize how terrible you are at what you do. And then you go back and try to fix it. And then you fail again. And then you go back, try to fix it until you get all those lovely green check marks. So that's what we've done. We've got all of our tests passing. So what if we really wanted to implement this? What if we wanted actually a GET request to fire off instead of just returning a simple string? Well, don't worry. We can do that too. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually return a promise. So we're going to return a promise from each one of these because that's what your HTTP GET request is going to do. Any kind of library usually is going to pass back a promise, or you're going to encapsulate them in your own promise. And then what we need to do is we need to mock the data. So what we've done here, right, we're loading in this JavaScript service. We're then calling it, and then we're making assertions based on that. But what we don't have is connection to an actual database. And even if we did go out to some web resource online, it's going to take 2 or 3 seconds maybe, or maybe it's or maybe it's on your local machine. It'll be really quick, but it's still not really reliable. And so having mocks in order to mock the data that you're going to get back from an external resource, that's going to help make sure that your tests pass and that it does expect, again, input goes in, the output comes out, and we have tests that are written around it so that it knows, okay, yes, that is exactly how it's supposed to work. And then we can actually write our service to actually, we can actually, sorry, getting tongue-tied. So then we can actually write our service to then use the actual real data. But then when the tests are ran, they will actually use our mock data. So let's go ahead and get into how to do that. So let's do that kind of with what we've already got set up here. So if we were to do an API type service that does a GET and a POST and all those different things, first, again, we're going to return a promise. So in order to do that, I'm going to cheat and look at the stuff that I made earlier because I love me some copy pasta. Okay, so I'm going to do a paste into our GET request. And you can see that we're now going to return a new promise, and then that promise is going to have a resolve, and then we're going to resolve the text WA. We're going to get a failing test, obviously. So now we've changed something, and now our tests are failing. And so now we're going to have to go back into our test and fix this so that it actually returns back, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to change the test up slightly. And what we're going to need to do is actually call the API.service.get, and then we're going to say .then. And then when it comes back, when the promise resolves, we're going to set data, and then we're going to return the data. And we're going to expect to equal, remember, wa instead of we. We. All right. Sorry, any fans of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged out there? If not, you're missing out. You're really missing out.
Kiss.
Kiss. I'm saying yes. Okay, so now let's see what we got here. So it still says we are not receiving the right thing. So we resolved wa, and we expect this .get .then. Oh, okay. So as simple as this seems, or as much as we'd like this to work, or as much as, you know, I would like it to work when I'm live streaming. This is not going to work because we actually don't have, again, when we do a GET request or we do some kind of a promise, we're waiting for that to finish resolving. And so we can't just expect it because it won't come back. It won't come back in time. So what we need to do is we need to do something. And again, I'm gonna cheat again. I just can't stop. Sorry again. I'm just like not super test master, but I really liked the concept, and we're gonna really dig in. Okay. I can do this. Okay, so I'm going to steal a little bit from here, and yeah, let's just do that. Okay. And again, all this code's going to be up on GitHub. I'll update the description as soon as we jump off the cast here. I'll update the description and include the link to the actual GitHub repository, so you guys can download this and test these out for yourself. God, I cracked myself up. Okay. So API service. So what we're going to do is we are going to, no. So what we're going to do is you should do a basic request. We already got that part. Get your shit together, Bobby. Get your shit. Get all your shit. Put it all together. Okay. So now what we've got here is we're going to expect assertions 1. So what this is telling Jest is that, hey, we're going to expect there to be one assertion following this. So it's going to expect us to return some kind of an assertion, one of them in this case. So this could be multiple, and that's what you set it up for. So we're going to return the API service get.then, and then you can see inside of here we actually have data and then a fat arrow, and then we are auto returning here the expect data to equal we. And again, we're going to change this to wa. And now our test should pass. Yeah, that rest spec is still being rendered, even though I commented it out. Meh. Okay. Okay, well, we're done with that anyway. Let's just delete it. Okay. So now you can see that we have our API and our API.spec. So now we've actually got the promise resolving with a string of wa, and then over here we have a, let me make this a little bit bigger. Over here we have the API service does a GET request, and then when it resolves the promise, it then takes the data that's handed back, in this case the string of wa, and then that data is expected to equal wa. And you'll notice that this is returning. So we're not putting like brackets or anything around this because it's automatically going to return that assertion, and then that is what is going to kind of clear out this guy who is expecting there to be an assertion. So so there we have the kind of rudimentary GET request, or like a promise, like how we resolve a promise in a test. But say again, we want on our live production app, we want our service to use the actual API or the actual database, and we want it to go out and make a REST request. But on our local machine, we just want to feed up some kind of fake data and then use that as input. And then we usually just get a sample of data from your data from like the actual API or something like that, and you put it in there, and that way you're actually dealing with real data. It's just not going out and making that round trip to the server. Okay, so this should, again, hopefully, let's cancel this. Let's clear our console out and let's restart our tests. npm run test watch. And I keep shrinking down my OBS. I hope we're on the right view. Okay, we are. Awesome. Hello to all of our viewers And a shout out this week to AJ, a viewer from Australia. So our videos are being viewed in Australia now. That's freaking awesome. I'm super happy to have you, AJ. He said that we are part of his weekend watching. So if we don't see you right now, AJ, then you have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy your Saturday coding session or Sunday coding session. I know I have enjoyed quite a few here recently.
Woo! Go AJ!
Yeah. If we had confetti guns, AJ, we'd be using them right now. Okay, so let me pop back open the project here. Okie dokie. So we've got our test, but now we need to actually mock some data. So in order to do that, let's pop open our file panel again. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a folder underneath our API service folder, and we're going to call it __mocs___. I would like this if anyone is watching from React team, please change that to being like api.mock.js or something along those lines, or something a little simpler. It makes sense when you have a folder full of tests. That's not a huge deal, but when you get to trying to really make everything into tiny little folders and components, it kind of gets to be a pain. But anyway, make a __mocs___ folder, and this is where you're going to hold the mock version of your actual service. So let's make a new file under here, and I'm going to say api.ts. So it's got to be named the same thing as what you named your actual service. And that's because I think what it's doing in like behind the scenes is it's basically taking that import that you're doing and it's kind of overriding it with the mock. And again, I'm not versed enough in this stuff to tell you the nitty-gritty of how that works. All I know is it's magic, it's awesome, and I'm going to show you how to set it up. So here we've got api.ts in our mocks folder, and what we're going to do is we're going to set up a mock of this service. So we're just going to copy the current service and I'm going to paste it in here. So in our mock, our get request would be a little bit different. Our get request would be probably doing a resolve of some actual local data. So you could maybe pull in some JSON data or set your own JSON data to be resolved, but this is the basic principle. So again, in my mock, I'm going to have it resolve via like a promise, and then I'm going to resolve the data manually. But then now I can actually go in our actual service, and in here I'd probably do some kind of like http.get or some kind of REST library, which I'll set up probably in a later video, or I might even do it offline and then just give you guys the synopsis of how that went. Or maybe it'll be a YouTube video here this next week. Who knows? We'll see how it goes. But right now, let's just set this up so that we are actually mocking the data out of this API mock rather than our service. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to head back over into our spec again. And then at the top here, we're going to, above the import, and this is very important. So if you don't put it above the import, it just ain't going to work. So you got to put it above the import. Lessons I learned in testing. Okay, so we're going to say jest mock. And then what we're going to do is pass in the /API. And so what this is going to do is this is going to then, again, like I said, it's going to take that API import and it's going to somehow like overwrite it with the mock version of our API. So this is what's going to allow us to then do those requests, do those GET requests, and then on our local, it's going to use the actual, the mocked data that we pass in, and then on the live version, it would use the actual API service from the backend. So here we've got cool. So everything should pass right off the bat. And I actually think that's all we have to do to mock data. To be quite honest, I think that's all there is to it. And now what we can, if we want to test it, all we have to do is let's change in here in our mock, let's change it to we instead of wa. And now you'll see that we get an error and it says, okay, I expected wa and I got we. And if we change in our API, if we change this guy to we get the error. But if I change this guy back to wa, now you'll see that it still passes, because when we're doing this mock, it's kind of overwriting this import. And generally what happens is you have an import of like a wrapper around that API. So for instance, we would maybe have a user service that would be solely responsible for managing things with the user. And then that would then use the API, and that's where this mock would come in. So I think it kind of figures out what dependency shares this module, and then it figures out how to mock it automatically, which is really, really cool. So there's like a general intro to just mocking up data. It's really simple. It's almost deceivingly simple, but when you start out, it's really complicated and hard to wrap your head around the idea of like, okay, how do I have no screen, I have no data, and in test-driven development you have no code, but you can see that like you're just kind of making assertions like true or false statements, and it allows you to then group those up via describe statements so that you can make logical units out of this stuff. And then it gives you kind of a checklist of things that you'd want to check to make sure something is working. And again, the brilliance of test-driven development is it gets you to run into some of the problems you might have structuring your component before you get there. A lot of times what happens when people first start writing tests, they do like what we have done, and they just kind of write tests for important things or just little tiny functionality. But the more that you get into writing code and the more that you get into writing bigger and bigger projects, the more crucial you realize it is to kind of step back and to actually take a look and see what what the structure of this piece of functionality is going to be. What data am I expecting in? What am I going to be putting out of this thing? And by doing that stuff, you kind of run into the logic problems earlier in the process rather than later, which is super important. And if you want a full breakdown of all the different stuff that Jest does, Jest Facebook, it's like, yeah. So I'll update the description with this link as well. This is the facebook.github.io for...
I put that one on the description already.
Oh, you already put the other one on the description. All right, awesome.
Well, I just put the Facebook one on there.
Oh, the Jest?
Yep. The facebook.github.io/Jest one.
Oh, perfect. Cool. So then Emily's got my back here. She's already got the link for Jest in the description. So feel free to check that out. They've got, if you go into their API section, you can kind of see all of the different methods that we can use inside of Jest. It gets a lot more complicated. There's so much more going on behind the scenes. This obviously is a very, again, rudimentary example of how this works. So we just go about basically importing our component or our service, and then we go about executing some piece of it, and then we assert true or false statements to go about checking. And then the describe statements just kind of group them up and lump them in little groups so that they're nice and pretty to look at. And then if you're getting kind of, again, if you're getting more and more towards test-driven development, kind of running the tests, writing them first, and then making your code, writing your code around your test so that eventually all of your green check marks pop up on the screen, and then you run around the room and give everyone high fives. But that's just me. That might just be me. So yeah, again, head on over to the Jest documentation, check out all the different things you can do. This is probably about 90% of most of the stuff that you'll do. You're just really kind of setting up these assertions. You're expecting data, and then there's actually a lot to the expect. Most of the time you're using equal or something like that, but there's tons of different stuff. Where's the expect down here? Describe. Oh, I don't have my glasses on. Ugh.
What you looking for?
Test. Ah, there we go. I forgot, under there, they have a test method rather than it. So that kind of threw me off a little bit when you're looking at this documentation. But it's the same thing. So we have, where did that expect go? Describe. Hold on, I'm going to try to see if I can see it on the full screen. Okay, here we go. So I don't know why I couldn't find this on the actual API reference, but here is, and it looks like it's, expand this out, looks like it's at facebook.github.io, Jest docs, and then expect. And this gives you the list of all the different assertions that you can make. So you can say something is not something. You can say something is falsy or greater than or less than. So all those kind of operators that you use to in like an if statement, you can use in these assertions in order to assert whether or not this should be true or false. So super helpful. So head on over to their documentation and check that stuff out. And again, check in to our YouTube video, or our YouTube, check into our YouTube channel, subscribe to us. We're going to have tons more content. We're going to start doing these Madness casts every week. We're on 3 weeks now, and we're just going to keep this trend up. It's been super fun for us to kind of interact with you guys on a more regular basis, and also hopefully start to field a lot more questions and comments and all that different stuff, and really kind of turn some of this side project that we've put off into fun collaborative projects that we can do with you guys. We're going to try to start doing some more stuff after our videos, like possibly doing some polls so that you can vote on maybe what to cover next week, or maybe what design you like better. We want to make this something that's very engaging and that we're all kind of working together to solve a problem. That's really kind of the whole idea behind these casts, again, is to keep it very raw, and we hope to get more active with feedback. So we'd love to have questions so that we can kind of expand upon these ideas. Again, we're still playing around a lot with this. As you can see probably from our webcam, we actually have a webcam that the mouth matches the audio. So that's a first in our Madness Cast series.
Moving on up.
Yeah, moving on up. So we got us a webcam this week. We also made ourselves our own little hue orb light. So see here, we got, ooh, look at that. Look at that. Ooh. Yeah, so we made our own little awesome hue orb light. Now let's jump over to the first screen. Yeah, we've got our... Woo!
Whoops.
So we've got our own little orb light, and we're trying to get some good lighting in here, so we can actually make something that's watchable, not just watching some sad person, sad developer.
Ooh.
Yeah, we've got mood lighting now, guys. We're moving right on up. So we're trying to get a little bit more professional in here. We're trying to put a lot of it into these casts, and so that we can make them fun and something that we enjoy doing and that you guys get a lot out of. Again, we're hoping that this becomes a regular part of your guys' week. Come, tune in, learn a little bit more about web components and about tests and JavaScript and Node and maybe even beyond that. And then we'll just keep expanding upon these ideas. And as you support us on Patreon, and subscribe to us on YouTube, as you do all those things, we're going to keep putting more into these videos. We're going to keep putting more in these casts. We're going to start, again, ironing out more of a schedule as far as what we're going to be covering and when, so you know when to tune in. We're going to try to get more engaged with you guys. Follow us on Twitter at MadnessLabs. Subscribe to us, Patreon. Do a bunch of stuff, guys. Woo!
All of these things are
yes,
things
all
now.
of these things are things that you can do. That you at home, you can do them. So we're going to cut this one a little bit short. We usually try to go about an hour and a half or so. We're going to cut this one a little bit short. I think we've covered the basis. I might follow up next week a little bit once I finish working through the bugs with testing out components. And I might do a quick follow-up at the beginning of next week just to kind of show how to actually write the tests for these UI components. But again, it's really just the same general practice. You're really coming into one of these things, you're loading up the element, and then once the element is rendered, you're then going about testing the different JavaScript tags, like the text content or the child nodes. You can actually query to how many child nodes there are. And all of those things become assertions that you can make sure that something's working correctly. Because there's nothing worse than pushing an update and it goes live and something breaks on the website, and you or your project stakeholder sees that and they just lose faith. So you definitely don't want that. So I've been Bobby. Try catch 'em from Palette. This is Emmy.
Hi.
And
I'm Play Pikachu.
Yeah, she's MJ Chu. So it's been fun, guys. Hope to see you guys again next week, and you can probably expect some kind of a YouTube video probably sometime later on this week. So nice having a cast with you guys. See you next time.
Thank you.